The next morning the family headed out to visit Kumiko's father. Cancer had left him with very little time, so any chance the family had to spend with him was to be cherished. On the drive, Kumiko leaned into the back seat and handed Rumi her Mr. Clown doll. "Did you lose this?" she asked. Rumi happily took the clown from Kumiko. "There you are, Mr. Clown," she said happily. "You're very naughty for sneaking out. You won't get any treats." "Why was it by Mommy and Daddy's bed?" asked Kumiko. Rumi gave no reply and began playing with her doll. "You shouldn't leave your toys lying around," said Hideki. "I'm always finding them all over the house." Once again, Rumi gave no reply. Kumiko gave up on getting a reply from Rumi. Instead, she began gazing out the window. "I hope we don't crash, Mr. Clown," said Rumi. "Bad things can happen on these roads." Rumi then changed her voice so that it was Mr. Clown who was speaking. "Then it's a good thing your mommy isn't the one driving." Hearing this captured Kumiko's full attention. "Rumi-chan, what did you just say?" she asked. Rumi gave no reply and continued playing with her doll. "What did she say?" Kumiko asked Hideki. "I don't know," replied Hideki. "Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm trying to remember what road to take. Do I take this next left or do I keep going straight?" Kumiko leaned as far toward the back seat as her seatbelt would allow her. "What did you say?" she asked. This time there was a hint of anger in her voice. "I didn't say anything," said Rumi. "Did you say something, Mr. Clown?" Rumi then changed her voice for Mr. Clown. "I didn't say anything either." "Kumiko, am I going the right way?" asked Hideki. "You should already know how to get there," exclaimed Kumiko. The family arrived at the Sashihara home a short time later. The yelling had ensured that the rest of the trip would be made in complete silence. Kumiko, Hideki, and Kumiko's mother sat at the dining table to discuss plans. Rumi was in the next room playing with her Mr. Clown doll. She was told not to enter the room so she wouldn't have to hear such grown-up talk. "Have you started making arrangements for the funeral?" Hideki asked Kumiko's mother. "My father is still alive," said Kumiko. "We shouldn't focus on that right now." "It's all right," said Kumiko's mother. "There's really no point in not talking about this. It really is inevitable at this point." Kumiko's mother then presented her daughter and son-in-law with a stack of papers. "Our lawyers wrote these documents for you and Hideki," she said. The trio was so consumed with the paperwork that they failed to notice Rumi had slipped away from the next room and was now exploring the house. It wasn't before long when Rumi found her grandfather's room. She cautiously opened the door and entered, quietly shutting the door behind her. The lights were turned off and the curtains were closed, making it somewhat difficult to see. Lying in bed was her grandfather. He was now painfully thin and all the color had been drained from him. The once strong man was a mere shell of his former self. "Hello, grandfather," said Rumi. Mr. Sashihara could barely muster the strength to turn his head as only a faint sound escaped through his colorless lips. "Grandfather doesn't look so good," Rumi said to Mr. Clown. She then changed her voice for her doll. "I think grandfather wants to die." Rumi nodded in agreement. Rumi tossed Mr. Clown aside and immediately retrieved a spare pillow. "Let's see how much grandfather likes being dead," said Rumi. It took quite some time, but eventually Kumiko and Hideki had finished reading through all of the papers that had been placed before them. "Can we see father now?" asked Kumiko. "Of course," replied Kumiko's mother. The three made their way to Kumiko's father's room. The first to enter was Kumiko. "Father," she said, cautiously making her way closer to his bed. There were no signs of life whatsoever coming from Mr. Sashihara. "He might be sleeping," said Hideki. "Father," said Kumiko, gently nudging him. "Father? Father?" Kumiko's voice was frantic enough to startle the others. "Dear," said Kumiko's mother, rushing to his bedside. She too began trying to wake him, but she was being far less than gentle with him than Kumiko. From the corner of her eye, Kumiko noticed Rumi watching the scene unfold. She was at the far end of the room holding her Mr. Clown doll and had the most blank of expressions on her face. The family went home a few hours later. There was nothing but silence between the three for the rest of the day. With what had happened, it came as no surprise that no one was in any kind of mood to converse. After being tucked in, Rumi began talking to her Mr. Clown doll. "It's too bad what happened to your grandfather," said Mr. Clown in Rumi's disguised voice. Rumi nodded. "Maybe if he had been a nicer person then that wouldn't have happened," said Mr. Clown. "Nice things happen to nice people," said Rumi. "Grandfather was not a nice person," said Mr. Clown. "He was a bad person." Rumi again nodded. "And you know what happens to bad people," said Mr. Clown. "Bad things happen to them," said Rumi. Kumiko had made the choice to stay with her mother for a couple of days to help her cope with the loss of her husband. This meant that Hideki would be on his own with little Rumi. Hideki and Rumi didn't interact much over the few days Kumiko was gone. But even before this sudden situation arose, Hideki and Rumi spent very little time together. Rumi liked to spend most of her time with her mother, and whenever Hideki brought that up, Kumiko would tell him it was normal at that age for children to be more attached to their mother, and Rumi would eventually grow closer to him. The only real time Hideki and Rumi spent together while Kumiko was away was during dinner. Hideki would try his best to have a conversation with his daughter, but she always seemed so distant and unwilling to interact with him. "How's the food?" asked Hideki. He had made a simple meal of rice and vegetables, the only meal he had any experience making. "It's the same thing we ate yesterday," replied Rumi, whose focus was on her food rather than her father. "I'm not as creative in the kitchen as your mother is," Hideki said sheepishly. "How about tomorrow we go out to eat? When is mommy coming home?" asked Rumi. "In a few days," said Hideki. "Since grandpa died, she has to help grandma for a while." "I don't like when she's not here," said Rumi. "You've still got me," said Hideki. Rumi gave her father no reply and continued eating. Sitting beside Rumi was her Mr. Clown doll. "You really like that toy, don't you?" asked Hideki. "I bet you didn't know that it was the first gift your mother ever bought for you." "Mommy didn't buy Mr. Clown for me," said Rumi before filling her mouth with a large portion of rice. "Of course she did," insisted Hideki. "Who else would she have bought it for?" Rumi didn't respond. "Rumi-chan," said Hideki, again receiving no response. "You've got to stop ignoring people when they're talking to you." Rumi continued to ignore her father and began playing with Mr. Clown. The usually docile Hideki had finally had enough. He caught his daughter completely by surprise and snatched Mr. Clown away from her. "Your mother might let you get away with this kind of behavior, but I'm not going to let you," exclaimed Hideki. "Give Mr. Clown back," demanded Rumi. "I'll give you your toy back when you start listening to me," said Hideki. "No," exclaimed Rumi. "I'm warning you, Rumi-chan," said Hideki. "If you don't put a stop to this behavior, haven't you hurt me enough?" asked Rumi. "What do you mean?" asked Hideki, his anger suddenly calmed. "What are you talking about? You're not nice," said Rumi, her demeanor now very dark and very unsettling. She then ran off to her room. After dinner, Hideki took to the living room to unwind and watch television. He had a can of beer in his hand and a few empties on a nearby table. The alcohol had quickly made him drowsy and far too oblivious to the world around him. Rumi was watching Hideki intently from the stairs. There was no expression on her face. She merely stood there and stared at him. In her hand was a large kitchen knife. Kumiko was washing the dishes at her parents' house when her mother entered the kitchen. "Kumiko," said her mother, "I've got to call the lawyer, but I can't seem to find his number anywhere. Do you have it?" "Yes, I have it saved in my phone," said Kumiko. She checked her pockets but came up empty. It quickly dawned on Kumiko where she had left her phone. "I left my phone at home. I've been using your landline while I've been here, so I hadn't even noticed that I didn't have it." "It's all right, dear," said Kumiko's mother. "With everything that's been happening, it's understandable." "I'll call Hideki," said Kumiko. "I'm sure he'll be able to find it for me. Then he and Rumi-chan can come drop it off. It will be nice to see them," said Kumiko's mother. Kumiko used the house phone to call Hideki. His cell phone rang several times, but he never answered. "He must not have his cell phone with him," said Kumiko. "I'm going to try calling the house phone." Again, nobody answered. "I suppose it can wait until morning," said Kumiko's mother. "No, I can go get my phone," said Kumiko. "If I go now, I can be back before bedtime." There was nothing out of the ordinary about the drive home. But what was out of the ordinary was that someone had left the front door unlocked. Nothing could have prepared Kumiko for what she was about to find. Upon entering, she found Hideki's lifeless body lying on the living room floor covered in blood. Kumiko let out a scream so loud that her neighbors heard it and called the police. The police arrived and immediately began scouring the house for evidence. Kumiko was asked a plethora of questions for which she had no answers, and Rumi was questioned, but all she had to tell detectives was that she had been asleep for hours. Hideki had been killed by a single slash to the throat. Detectives determined that with so many empty beer cans in the room that Hideki must have been so inebriated that he had made himself the easiest of targets for the unknown attacker. Once the interviews were over, Kumiko took Rumi to her parents' house. Rumi fell asleep quickly in one of the spare bedrooms as her mother sat nearby and watched her with teary eyes. The girl looked almost angelic as she slumbered peacefully. "What happened?" whispered Kumiko as she ever so gently ran her fingers through Rumi's hair. Kumiko's mother entered. "Kumiko, you should get some sleep," she said. "I've prepared your bed." "I'll be there soon," said Kumiko. After her mother left, Kumiko leaned in and kissed Rumi's forehead. "Mommy loves you very much," she whispered. "I won't ever let anyone hurt you." After Kumiko left, Rumi opened her eyes. Her expression was one of pure anger. Over a week had passed and Kumiko had yet to return to normal life. She spent most of her time in the same bed she had slept in as a child. It was familiar to her and brought her a small sense of peace during such a tumultuous time. Kumiko's mother, who had been in desperate need of a helping hand only days ago, was now acting as the primary caretaker for both Kumiko and Rumi. Unlike with most others, Mrs. Sashihara was not given the cold shoulder by Rumi. The two actually got along quite well. "How was your day, Rumi-chan?" asked Kumiko's mother as she and her granddaughter ate dinner. "It was good," replied Rumi. "We painted pictures with real paint today. Teacher said she liked mine the most." "That's so nice," said Kumiko's mother. "Can I show it to mommy?" asked Rumi. "Your mommy needs to rest, she's been through so much. When she's ready, then we can see her." "I've been through a lot too," said Rumi, her mouth now stuffed with bread. "Even more than mommy." "Rumi-chan," said Kumiko's mother, "you shouldn't compare your problems to your mommy's." Unaffected by what her grandmother had just said, Rumi went back to eating her dinner. The next day Kumiko's mother took Rumi to school, then headed to the city to meet with the family lawyer, leaving Kumiko on her own. Kumiko had been able to cope as best she could by filling herself with prescription pills, but those pills were quickly running out. "Where did you put that number?" Kumiko asked herself as she searched her purse. When her search came up empty, she threw her purse to the floor. With nary a moment's hesitation, Kumiko retrieved her car keys and departed the Sashihara house. Being in such desperate need for something that could calm her frazzled nerves, Kumiko arrived at Dr. Kojima's office in no time at all. "Kumiko," said the nurse working the front desk. She looked and sounded quite surprised to see the familiar face. "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry I didn't call first," said Kumiko, "but I need to see the doctor. It's urgent." "Didn't you hear?" asked the nurse. "Dr. Kojima is gone." "Where did he go?" asked Kumiko. "Could you give me his new address? I really need to see him." "No, Kumiko, Dr. Kojima is dead." Kumiko's heart sank. "What? We're not sure what happened to him," said the nurse. "About a week ago I found him slumped over his desk not breathing. They haven't released the cause of death yet." Without saying another word, Kumiko departed. With no destination in mind, Kumiko headed for the park where she and Rumi liked to spend much of their free time. She took a seat on the bench the two would sit on to enjoy their melon bread, and tried to allow the peace and quiet of the park calm her. But the only thing the quiet did was let the horrible things that were happening in her life consume Kumiko. Unable to keep her composure any longer, Kumiko began to sob uncontrollably. Kumiko returned home after her trip to the park. "I'm home," she called out. "Mother, are you here?" "Rumi-chan." The house was empty and eerily quiet. With no one to stop her, Kumiko began rummaging through the house for whatever she could find to sedate her anxiety. She was hoping her mother had something to help her calm down, but all she found were medications for common elderly ailments. Kumiko searched the kitchen cabinets, but all she found was her bottle of sleeping pills. "I don't want to sleep," she said, throwing the bottle into the trash can. "All I do is think about you when I close my eyes." After Kumiko poured herself a glass of water, the phone began to ring. Though she was in Kumiko, "It's me, Miss Ito," said the voice on the other end. "Oh, Miss Ito, hello," replied Kumiko. "I was just calling to see how you were doing. I ask Rumi all the time about you, but she never wants to talk about it." "I'm doing okay," said Kumiko, though the shakiness of her voice proved otherwise. "Rumi seems to be handling everything very well," said Miss Ito. "I've never seen a child act so normal after. ... I tried to get Rumi-chan to stay home," said Kumiko. "But she said she wanted to go to school. She's a very strong girl. All the teachers wanted me to tell you that they hope to see you again soon," said Miss Ito. "Tell them that I appreciate them thinking of me," said Kumiko. "I feel like I'm almost ready to get back to a normal life." "That's good to hear," said Miss Ito. "I'll make sure to tell all the other teachers how you're doing." "Thank you," said Kumiko. "Oh, before I let you go," said Miss Ito, "I finally remembered the name of the little girl that Rumi is always drawing. I know it isn't important, but not knowing her name has been bothering me for so long." "Oh," said Kumiko. A disinterested Kumiko proceeded to take a large drink of water as she waited for Miss Ito to tell her what the girl's name was. "Yes, her name is Takayo," said Miss Ito. The glass slipped out of Kumiko's hand and crashed to the floor where it shattered into hundreds of pieces. "Hello, Kumiko, are you all right?" asked Miss Ito. I'm fine," replied Kumiko. "I'm sorry, but I have to go now." After hanging up on Miss Ito, Kumiko began cleaning up all the broken glass. Her whole body was shaking terribly as she did so. Just as Kumiko was about to dump the glass into the trash can, she noticed something partially hidden within the waste. She carefully sifted through various discarded items and discovered Rumi's Mr. Clown doll. His arms, legs, and head had all been cut off, leaving behind only his torso. The front door opening startled Kumiko and prompted her to quickly shove the dismembered doll back into the trash can. "We're home," said Kumiko's mother. "We ate ice cream," said Rumi. Kumiko exited the kitchen and greeted the two. "Welcome home," she said. Kumiko couldn't help but feel anxious as she looked at the smile on her daughter's face that she feared was hiding a most horrible secret.